Welcome back to the Dads and Angels podcast. I'm Kyle, and I'm here with my buddy Bobby Granger. Bobby, how you doing tonight?
Good, Kyle. How are you?
Doing great. So tell us your story.
Sure. So, I guess our story might be a little different and maybe different than what most you may end up talking to guys and dads on this show. Is that our loss happened pretty early on in what would have been Megan's third pregnancy, and so a little background: we've had now two miscarriages and one successful pregnancy. We have a 2-year-old daughter, Evelyn, now, and so-called the rainbow baby, if you will, and in between those two miscarriages. And so this most recent one, the first one was for us something that we didn't really know what was happening. It was the first time, she was pregnant, and it was exciting, and we were like telling everybody, and it was just one of those things that you just like in experience and hindsight shows that you need to keep quiet for a little while. And so the hardest part about that one was going back and actually having the conversation with people that we told, like, oh, by the way, Megan's not pregnant anymore. And it was just a weird thing to do. And so with this, then Evelyn came along, and she's perfect. She was born 2 months early. So that while I say a successful pregnancy, it wasn't without its complications. Everything was fine until one day Megan was like, hey, I don't feel right. Let's go to the doctor. And we showed up, and the doctor was like, hey, you're not leaving here until you have a baby. And that was right at the 32-week mark. And so our first baby spent 5 weeks in the NICU. And so that, was in and of itself a story, maybe for a different podcast. But the second one was a lot more tough, I believe. And, we'd been trying for a number of months, with the way Evelyn came into the world. It was very abrupt, emergency C-section, all of that stuff. And so Megan was under some guidance from her doctor that we shouldn't try for at least a year. And so that kind of put a hiccup in what our family plan was, so to speak. And so we were trying to, have another one sooner than later. And it just that it took probably, 6 months or so. And while that's not a long time, I think a lot of folks try for a lot longer than that. It seemed like forever for us. And finally it was, we had the positive pregnancy test. It was awesome. It was all, 3 times now that I've seen that. It's one of the best feelings I've ever had. It's such a, interesting feeling. I don't know really how to describe it, but so we had that, and we were all excited, and Megan was feeling great. She had made it, for us into the 6-7 week mark. She was feeling sick, just similar to what had happened the time with Evelyn, the pregnancy with Evelyn. Poor Megan, she goes through a lot right now, and or whenever that first trimester, she's very sick, and so it had already started. So we were like, okay, this is good. While it sucks for Meg, obviously, what she's dealing with, for us, those are good indicators and positive indicators. And then, right before our 8-week ultrasound, that week or so leading up to that, she just didn't feel 100%, and it was like, God, something's wrong, something's different. And I obviously don't know what she's feeling. I don't know what she's experiencing or how to talk to her about that. And so I was like, well, I'm sure everything will be fine. Every pregnancy is different, and just trying to, help her along and be supportive and get her what she needs and do all that. So we show up to the ultrasound, and even driving there that morning, I just had a weird, strange feeling. And so we get there, we go in, and she's just putting off like a vibe that I'm like, wow, she's not really comfortable being here. This is just, she's holding my hand real tight and stuff like that. It's just like, this is not normal from, the other time that it was, I guess, normal. So we go in, and, they get everything going, and they get the image on the screen. And, for me, the first thing that I look for is that little fluttering image, of the heartbeat. And, there's the sound and then there's no sound. And I looked at the technician's face, and she had like this look of like, oh shit. And then immediately she turned into like, oh, it's okay. The baby's measuring a little small, but for right now, maybe we're off on the weeks or like, no, we're definitely not off. We know exactly when and where and all this other stuff. Like we're very certain that we should be right about 8 weeks now. And she's like, well, sometimes the heartbeat doesn't show. She was just being really sweet. And Megan and I both knew that was just like, man, there's nothing there. And so it was hard to watch that and then to be there with Megan as she's dealing with that. And so they're like, well, come back in a week and we'll see. Maybe they waited a full week. Meanwhile, like all the symptoms of, pregnancy, morning sickness, nausea, avoidance to food, smells, that kind of stuff. It just stopped, like abruptly stopped. Like she was her normal self again. And we both just knew like, God, this is happening all over again. And so we go in the next week and I don't know. I feel bad for this technician who was in there with us because she's just reading the chart and saying, "Oh, you're 9 weeks pregnant. Congratulations!" And like going in and like being really happy about it. And we both know why we're there. We're there to make sure that you know there is no heartbeat. Like we knew that, and we just knew it. And she's like, "So I see," and then she just didn't know, and she didn't pick up the fact that Megan's face was puffy and her eyes were red and bloodshot, and neither one of us looked very thrilled to be there at that time. And I felt bad for her because I gave her a really, dirty look and some other stuff. I never said anything to her, but it was just like, wow, this isn't good. And it just kind of put you in that mental state, put Megan through a lot. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So confirmed, no heartbeat. And then once she knew why we were there and she figured it out, she immediately turned into kind of the way the other woman did and was very sweet and, supportive and, can I get you anything? And, got some tissues and stuff like that, as obviously it was a little emotional for us. But when we went up and saw the doctor and, in preparation for this visit, Megan had been kind of, she'd been fasting because she knew that there was the option that she was going to have a procedure done and all that kind of stuff. So we get there and we talk to the doctor and the doctor was like, well, these are the two things that we can do. And we opted for the D&C. And so then we went over to, outpatient surgery and waited for a number of hours, and they gave Megan some medicine to kind of get things going and dilate it, and so that the doctor could go in easily and take care of what she needed to take care of. So the whole time though, we were kind of in there. A couple of different people came to visit us. I think the chaplain came because it's a Catholic hospital, St. Vincent's here in Carmel, Indiana. And so they do there's a faith initiative there. And so I think I don't really remember a whole lot, but I think the priest came by and said a prayer and that sort of thing. And then when it really kind of hit was when the woman came to talk about infant loss. Because to us at that point, we hadn't, I don't think, come to terms with maybe the infant part of that. Because for us, because we were so early, I think, in the pregnancy that it was still, obviously we knew that, it would be an infant and it was an infant and there should have been a heartbeat and all of those things. And, but I think at that point it really hit us both like a ton of bricks, but I think it came back and hit Megan on the backswing kind of, because it just tore her up. And, part of being a husband and a father or a partner and, a father, however, you end up being a dad or a father figure to someone, you always want to be there for your partner, your wife, whoever that is. And, at that moment in time, it's like, I can't do a thing right now. And I think for me, that's probably what the hardest part of this whole deal was watching her deal with a lot of this kind of internally. And I would say Megan is emotional, about a lot of things. but I've never kind of seen her take it anything like this. And it was hard to watch her do that and be there with her. I was there, I was trying to support and do what I could, but it was like she's feeling pain from the medicine. And then this lady comes in and says, do you want, you know, do you want the remains, if you will, to take home, and or stuff like that. And then Megan's like, I didn't even think about that. Like, what do I do? Am I a bad mom for not taking them and doing this kinds of stuff? It was all stuff that we weren't necessarily prepared for. And then
Yeah, and who really is? But so
yeah,
early on, I mean, you're kind of in a middle part where you have to make those decisions. Like you said, they talk about infant loss. It's like we weren't even
yeah.
at that point
And
yet.
so it just makes you really like, oh crap, like things got heavy and like accelerated very quickly. And so, as we then talked about that, like, what do we want to do? And then ultimately we decided, and then she did let us know, the nurse let us know, she was like, we will take care of everything if you don't want to. And we were like, let's do that. Like that's probably the best. And so, and then they gave us this little book. And in fact, I have it here on my desk because I was kind of preparing for this, and I don't know why I keep it, but I keep it in my desk drawer. Maybe it's a coping mechanism or something, but it's got it's a little, coping with infant loss and that kind of stuff. And while Megan is trying to get comfortable in the hospital bed and stuff, I'm like reading this and trying not to cry and, get myself worked up about it. So I think I kept it so I could look at it again later. And then they offered like, oh, once a month we do a service for, for the, for this type of thing. And, we have a vault at this cemetery here nearby, and we do a small service every month. And then at the end of the year in December every year, we do a kind of an angel's service essentially for infant loss. And so anybody that's had, kind of what we went through versus, all the way up into, kind of what you and your wife went through, they have a service there for those folks. And so she initially wanted to go to one of those, but as kind of I deal with things more internally, like, I signed up to run a race the day that we were supposed to go. And, I don't think that sat very well with her. And from that moment at the end of September, when that happened, to probably the middle or beginning of December, and I don't know, Megan's home. I don't know if she can even hear me, but I felt, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but, I felt kind of a wedge kind of being driven between us. And the only common denominator here was that, we had Evelyn. And so that's what, kept us focused, I think, on, hey, we need to be parents too. And so, not only are we dealing with this as a couple, and it was kind of like a real first adversity, maybe. It was the first time that we've dealt with something, I think, that severe. Like, in our minds, we had issues before where, we were going to buy a house, but then something happened. So we didn't get the house. And so we were really upset about that. And I was like, well, in the end, like, who gives a shit? Like, that just is nothing compared to what we just went through.
Exactly. It's one of those hashtag perspective
Yeah,
things, you know?
first world problems or whatever you want to call it. But up until, so it was just like, I'm dealing with this on my own, but at the same time, not really getting over it. And she's kind of dealing with it on her own. And at the same time, eventually we both kind of figured out that neither one of us were over it. And we kind of had a moment, I guess. We were in our living room and just kind of talking, and it just kind of blew up a little bit. And we kind of had like I just said, a moment. And luckily, Evelyn wasn't here, and I think she was with her grandma that day, or something. And so it really kind of changed a couple of things. That whole event, challenged us as a married couple. It challenged us as parents. Like, do we want to go through that again? Like, because this, one of three. If we do this a fourth time, are we running the risk of this happening again? I think, that's something you always consider. It's like, 'cause it's happened to us twice, like, is it going to happen a third time? And like I said to her, I was like, I can't do that again. And, like I said, our story's a little different. And maybe some folks who are listening to this, like, yeah, 1 in 5 pregnancies end in a miscarriage or something, or 1 in 5 women have that. And, I understand that. And then, you know, I guess if folks want to say, well, we've had that happen too, and, you're kind of making a big deal about it. I'm like, okay, well, that's your opinion, I suppose, but this was our experience, and it was very trying for us. And so we're trying to deal with that. And like I said, it's not the same as kind of what other people and part of that group that you and I are a part of. It's like, wow, like these guys have really dealt with a lot, and you know
Right.
maybe more so than what we did. And in fact, I would say definitely more so than what we did. But at the same time, like it was at that intersection of time for us that this happened at, like, probably not a good moment for us. And, because there was just a lot of stuff going on. And so it just kind of boiled over at that point. I think, we went on vacation after that, and it was like, well, she's kind of recovering from surgery. And so we can't do as much as we had planned. And so then I kind of got like selfish about it. And then like those kinds of things, as you go back and think about that, I was like, what were you doing? Like your wife just went through this horrible experience, and you're mad because she can't go on a hike. And it's like, why are you mad about that? And so it's like, those are the things that you have to go back and think, like, you as a male don't have to deal with a lot of the things that our partners do when they go and have pregnancy and do all of that. And so the stuff that, it really kind of put me into perspective, like, that's not my burden. I don't think I could handle what she did. And it just kind of helps me understand that the woman I married is probably the strongest person I've ever met in my life. She may not be physically strong, or whatever, but the mental strength it takes to deal with something like that, and then the physical part of that too, like getting over that and dealing with all those things and the changes of her body, and going back and forth, and then saying, hey, let's do this again. Like, I can't imagine the mental. I talk about, like, I don't want to deal with that again. It's like, what? Who cares about me? Like, she's going to deal with it more than you are if it happens again. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You
it's
go back and
hard.
forth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where it's like you think like, okay, yeah, like I shouldn't be, I shouldn't be worrying about this, or I shouldn't be whining about this right now because my wife went through so much. But at the same time, like, you know, it's okay. You're gonna have these moments where, like you said, you feel selfish, or you start doing something to take care of you, and it's such a fine little line that you have to walk
Mm-hmm.
as a
And
dad with
not
that.
just a dad, I think it's just as a partner. When you go through any adversity with your spouse or whoever, it's always a fine line. Like, who's dealing with it worse? And I think part of what the issue may have been for us was, I was so focused on her. Like, how can I make sure she's okay? She has everything she needs. So I was almost like to the point where it's like overbearing a little bit, and you know, but at the same time, like, and again, he's talking about that fine line. It's like, no one ever asked me, like, how are you doing with that? And again, that's a pretty selfish thing, but at the same time, everyone's always asking, like, how's Meg? Like, how's she doing? And I totally am. I don't want it to sound like I'm like needing sympathy or something like that. I wanted to say, like, first and foremost, my concern was with Megan, and I think, first, second, and third was her. And I think by putting myself so far back, that it then did more harm for us in the long run than it would have had I said, what do I need to do to get over this too? And it wouldn't have boiled over to that, conversation, if you will, we had in December, and that kind of stuff. And so, you know, and at that point in time in December, she was like, I had no idea. Like, are you okay? And I was like, that's all I wanted you to ask me this whole time.
And what did that feel like right after you said that?
Well, it felt pretty good because after that, I was like, okay, this is all over. Like, I just wanted someone to, that's it. I just wanted someone to ask me if I was okay. And then I could say yes. And then everything was fine. Like, I feel like after that moment, it was like, okay, everything is off me now. Like, I'm okay. I know I'm okay. I just affirmed that I'm okay. I'm really okay. Like, that's all you needed, was to say that you're okay to somebody. But you needed someone to ask you first. And that's at the same time, I feel guilty about that. Like, why did I need someone to ask me that? Like, it didn't matter. Like, none of the stuff, like, I didn't go through all of that physically, mentally, the stuff that she did. So, like, what does it matter? So that, it's just hard, I think, sometimes. And kind of going back even to when, Evelyn was born. And obviously that was I think, a more traumatic event, maybe in terms of physical nature for Megan, because it was really abrupt. It was, emergency surgery, all of that stuff. She doesn't remember probably an hour before versus, 4 or 5 hours, maybe more later. So it's like I'm filling her in on all this stuff. And, knowing that everything was fine at that point, in the end, everything was okay. So it's like, okay, there wasn't any loss here. It was just like we had a big event happen. Everybody's okay. It's all good. So everyone's kind of checking on Meg and doing all that. And I'm like, okay, first, second, and third, Meg, are you okay? Like, what can I do? What can we get you? Like, all this kind of stuff. And then, a couple of days later, it's like, it's starting to toll on me a little bit, like all the stuff that's going on. Like, I hadn't slept much. And, while Megan, didn't sleep a whole lot either, I think she was resting comfortably, a number of times. Maybe that little green morphine button that they get was pretty funny to watch. Like, she could touch it or press it every time it turned green. And so sometimes she'd be feeling pain and it would be red and then it would turn green and she'd press it and she'd let out. It's like, oh yeah, kind of thing. And then she would go to sleep for a while. What really sucks, and kind of gotten off on a tangent here, but the day after Evie was born, that weekend, I got food poisoning in the hospital.
Oh, Jesus.
It was Saturday. So she was born on Friday. And on Saturday, my grandparents came up and we went out and they were like, here, let me go take you out to lunch. And so I'm like, great, this is perfect. So we went out to what was my favorite Cajun restaurant here in Indianapolis. I won't,
I like that
yeah, I
was your
won't say the
favorite.
name just because I don't want to keep anybody from going there. But anyway, we got back to the hospital that night or that day or the next day. And, my friend Jeremy had come down and we were visiting with each other. And I was like, man, I don't feel very good. And I went to the bathroom and I came back. I was like, that was not healthy. And then like later on, I was like, man, I feel like I'm going to get sick. And I go to the bathroom and I get sick. And I was like, oh my God, I got to go to the bathroom again. And I was like, oh no, this is bad. And so I'm like, all right, I got to go home. So I left the hospital. Like, I left Megan and Jeremy and my two other of our friends in the hospital. I was like, I can't be here. Like, the nurses are going to freak out if I'm going to the bathroom every 5 minutes puking. They're going to like, get him out of here. He's sick. Well, I was like, really, it's just food poisoning. But I mean, that was probably the worst 8 to 12 hours that I've ever experienced. Like, I was at home by myself, just knowing that Megan's in the hospital bed, like dying. And I'm at home in my bed, like dying from a different thing. It was just, so anyway, all that to say is like that first week or two, probably after Evie was born, somebody called me. It was a friend, a fraternity brother that I had known for a number of years. He was a consultant and I met him when I was an undergraduate and he was working for the organization. And he just called me. He was like, hey dude, how are you doing? And I was like, oh my God, like nobody's asked me that yet. I'm doing well. Thanks. I really appreciate you asking. And then it was just like, okay, everything's fine again. So I think sometimes, maybe for me, to deal with stuff like that, sometimes I just need that, like, hey, are you okay? And then I could tell them no or yes, or just tell them how I'm feeling. But generally it's like, yeah, I'm okay. Thank you for asking. And that's it. And like I said, I think there's some selfishness there. And I feel a little guilty, every now and then for that. But at the same time, like, we all grieve or deal with things differently. And sometimes it's just that affirmation that someone's there who cares about you and just wants to know how you're doing. So,
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, even when you're narrating your story too, I can I can almost kind of feel it, especially with the first one, and maybe because I kind of knew where the story was going with the that moment that you guys had in the living room. But like it's like building and building and building, and even in your voice as you're narrating it, you get more relaxed right after you talk about it. So it's like I feel like part of it you're kind of reliving in your mind a little bit, and then, I mean, once you had that moment again, did it feel good right during when you were just describing it too?
I
Because it
guess,
sounded
yeah,
like
I
it.
think because from then on, in December and now we're at the beginning of March, I feel like just things between us have been different and different in a good way. Um, and I think, I don't, there was never, and I don't think any danger of like, us not continuing and things like that. I think at that point in time, it was just kind of like we both need to just hear each other out for a second. Like, we need to get over this. We need to put, not, we don't need, I guess, I don't know if you ever get over it, maybe. I mean, I mean, shit, I still have this little pamphlet that they gave me from the hospital. So it's like, obviously, I don't think I'm totally over it, but it's like, okay, we've kind of put that aside now as an experience that we've had together that we can grow from and be better from. And now we know that in a situation that is thrown at us that we're not really prepared for in an adverse kind of way, that can negatively affect how we deal with each other and communicate, and we know how to deal with that on the front end now. And it's not, me going to run a race and put my nose out, nose in the ground, butt up kind of thing, while she still is kind of like dealing with it in a different way. And so I think now we know what we need to do in that sort of situation, whether it's kind of a, if it happens again for us, we know what's going on and how to deal with it. If it's a loss of a family member, a loss, of any kind, a pet, family member, whatever, a job, whatever it may be, I think we both know now how to cope with it a little for each other, I think. And I think that's a learning moment that, hopefully most people don't ever have. But at the same time, being a part of this and connecting with you and these other men on this group, it's like, okay, wow, a lot of people have had to deal with this stuff, and it's very hard. And while we pain and feel for each other, being there for each other at the same time is just good. And I think that support group is always helpful.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and especially when you're talking about a support group and being together with guys who have gone through the same thing. Sometimes it's nice, you don't even have to talk about the loss part or the grief part. Sometimes if you're just talking about maybe a common interest, or you and I both enjoy running quite a bit, but just having someone there to know that if you're having that conversation, then all of a sudden there's a break where you're just like, I just need a minute. That other person understands, and someone who hasn't gone through that might get a little confused by that situation, because I think most people tend to have this where there'll be these triggers that happen where you'll be going through your normal day, and then all of a sudden something silly, something not necessarily stupid, but something small might just remind you of the situation, and it can kind of stop you in your tracks a little bit. And I think when you're around, guys who have gone through this, or other guys who have gone through some sort of loss like this, you feel like, okay, I can go through that moment real quick and then just pick right back up and like nothing happened. That person understands. One of the things that you were talking about, I've heard people talk about how, this going through the loss of a child has made them a stronger person. I've heard people talk about how it's strengthened the relationship, but I think you're the first person that has, voluntarily said or come out and said, like, okay, we went through this real kind of tough relationship, this span of time where we had kind of a tough relationship. But then once we got over it, we know how to handle any of the bullshit that's going to happen later on. Anything that comes up later on, like, we can handle that on the front end. And I think that's, if there was one takeaway message from this whole thing that I really want listeners to take away from you, is that message. Like, it's a bad thing what happens. It's a thing that's out of our control. But the way in which you and your wife handle it, where you can take on future events, like that's spinning it around saying, okay, this made us tougher, this made us stronger, and this strengthens our relationship. We're good. We're good to go at the next battle. And I can't tell you how impressive that is to hear.
At least we think.
Yeah. Well, hey, you know what? It's knowing is half the battle, right? With the whole G.I. Joe thing. But I mean, it's your mental strength. It shows, and not only your mental strength, but the strength in your relationship. And I think everyone's going to go through a rough relationship patch with when they have a challenge of some kind. And you think, like, we talked about things that have gone on, where, things that we thought were really bad until this happens, and we, we think like, and things like that end relationships like they're made of balsa wood. But I think this happens to people, and it shows that their relationship is probably stronger than they even think. Even if they do have that rough part to it, that if it breaks down a little bit, it builds back even stronger. And I think, your relationship with Megan and how you guys, mentally prepare yourself, having gone through this twice and having, some complications with your daughter as well. Like, you guys are strong. It's that word doesn't really do it justice, but I would definitely say that you guys have a very strong and very stable relationship going forward. And it's funny when you talk about the food poisoning thing, and I've probably had maybe 2 or 3 bouts of it. And when I tell my wife, like, oh my God, I think I have food poisoning, she just rolls her eyes, because she's like, food poisoning, really? It's like, yeah, I kind of look back like, okay, well, that's not so bad, I guess. But I mean, it's like man flu too. Like, I'm sure most of our listeners have probably had man flu at some point in time where, our wives get sick, and they tough it out to go to work. We're like, oh my God, call my mom, bring me some soup. I'm on the couch, I'm laid up. And, and it's okay to laugh about it too. I mean, you talked about how, when you were going through some of this stuff, you feel guilty. That's okay. But it's also okay to laugh about some of this stuff too, where it's like, man, my wife is so much stronger than me. Like, I could go to the gym and lift as much weight as possible, but I mean, with the stuff my wife went through, she's 100 million times stronger than I'll ever be. And that, you know what? That's okay. Like, that's what this situation highlights,
Yeah,
So,
that's the only time I've ever had food poisoning. And I think it was just like, of course, this happens to me while she's dealing with like the most traumatic thing maybe she's ever dealt with. And number one, I'm not there. And number two, I'm like a pathetic wimp baby at home, like curled up in a ball in a fetal position on the bathroom floor, while my dog is in the other side of the house, curled up in a ball, scared because of the noises that are coming out of my body. And, he's like, this is weird, man. And it's just like, of course, like I had to make it about me kind of thing. It's like, that's not what I intended to do here.
yeah,
It's not our option.
yeah.
She's flying
Oh
around right now.
man.
She's playing airplane.
Well, I tell you, you left.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, and you had Jeremy there to kind of handle things on the home front too.
Yeah.
So, our mutual buddy Jeremy's if there was anybody good to leave in your stay while you had to kind of take care of that, I mean, it's kind of a shout out to Jeremy, but he's one of those guys. He gets it. He'll step in for you. So
I think part of,
I mean,
like what you had said a minute ago about having a strong relationship and being able to deal with some stuff like that. I think part of it too is having, a good support team, not only, our spouses and our partners, but it's, our friends and family who, may have dealt with a similar situation. My mom had, a miscarriage as well. And even Megan's mom had a history of miscarriage also. So it's like, we have people in our life who had dealt with something like that before, who could kind of talk us through it. Well, Jeremy and his wife maybe have not, or at least that I know of. At the same time, he's such a good friend that he'll just listen and talk and just let you talk for hours, and he'll just listen and be like, yeah, I totally, maybe I don't understand where you're coming from or what's happening to you, but I'm here for you in that way. And I could never ask for a better friend than a guy like him, for sure.
yeah. And I mean, my thoughts are the same thing. And when you and Megan went through the DNC procedure, our situation happened. So I mean, this podcast has become my friend Jeremy time, but I mean that's the point of it, to talk about our support systems. But our friend Jeremy, I mean, he was he had to back this, and that was, I'm sure that was carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders. And I mean, I'm sure we'll have him on here one day, but we talk about, like, other guys who have gone through this and how they get it. And, sometimes I think we convey the message that maybe some other people won't get it, but I think there's few and I would definitely put Jeremy into that realm of guys who they can see it. If they don't completely understand everything you're going through, they can see it and they will understand. And like those moments I was telling you about, I had a moment where I was talking to Jeremy about something completely different, and then I had to stop, and he's just like, dude, it's okay, do your thing. And then we just went right back to it. So, and now, I mean, you and I, met up through him, and it's just it's incredible how the support system can kind of build these types of relationships, you know. So, but yeah, it's that I guess that was the Jeremy rabbit hole that was inevitable for this
I'm
podcast.
sure he'll
But
appreciate it.
I mean, anybody listening and knows him, I mean, you can definitely see it. I mean, we're not even doing that guy
Yeah.
justice. Bobby, tell me, with the first miscarriage and then the second miscarriage, when you found out, how, were the feelings the same? Were they different? Did you feel like you evolved for the second one, or you were stronger to take on the second one? Tell me a little bit about the comparison.
Well, I think the first one, like I said, it was something that neither of us. I don't think either of us really knew what was going on, because we were pretty naive, I think, to the whole pregnancy thing and how it worked, and what we should be doing, and stuff like that. And it was like, yeah, she was 4 or 5 weeks pregnant, and then we were like telling people about it, and I was like, well, that's our first mistake. So I think the first one was, it was still, I mean, in the end, I think it was still an event that, one of those galvanizing events for us, but in no way do I think that it prepared us for what was going to happen the second time. I think just the second time, with because of how she was feeling, and the feelings of like, okay, we finally we have another one on the way, it's our second one, and this is great, like perfect, this is exactly what we wanted. The baby would be due in May, which is like my favorite month of the year, like everything was like perfect. And then it just like wrecked, uh, off a cliff, and it all happened so fast. But then it was like that long agonizing week in between the ultrasound where we didn't see the heartbeat, and then the second one where we confirmed that it wasn't there, and then 3 hours later going into surgery, or she's going into surgery. I'm in the room with her waiting. The priest comes, the lady talking about infant loss comes, the doctor comes, and then the surgery is delayed because another woman had a procedure being done that the doctor was performing. So it was just like this big ordeal. And I just think that day was just so much of a different thing for us that the first one didn't really even compare. And what we've, in the end, it's like that first one, it was like, yeah, a lot of women experience it like that. Not a lot, I would say, maybe more, like that 1 in 5, that 20% number that I threw out earlier is a number that I've heard. I don't know that it's maybe statistically backed up, so I don't want anybody to like cite me or have me cite where I heard that, but that's just things I've heard from folks, and even kind of a doctor perhaps, but it's just kind of like things like that happen more often than what we know. And like, even through this whole thing, it's finding out that our friends, 3 of my close friends, have had this kind of a similar, experience that we had this the second time. Um, you know, a guy I went to college with, and another, he and his wife, who I went to school with both of them, they had probably a more serious event, as it was later on in the pregnancy that they lost um, their baby. And then another girl I went to high school with, her and her husband, who's become a good friend of mine, the godparents to my daughter Evelyn, they had a similar issue, or not, maybe not the same issue, they just had a similar experience. And it was probably a little bit later in the pregnancy too, around 10 or 11 weeks, I think, is when that happened for them. So, just knowing that, my friends have had to deal with that stuff, and it's more common than we think. And that when you talk about that support system, that's what's so important, is being able to, you don't want to have that commonality with people. Like, this is the thing you don't want to have in common with someone. Like, I'd rather be talking to you about, like, how fast you can run a mile, or how many races you've done, or swim, bike, run, hunt, or that kind of stuff, all things that I enjoy doing. But our commonality, the thing that has brought us together, is this. And it's like, maybe, the old, the saying, things happen for a reason. Yeah, I suppose. And, maybe, someone who listens to this, finds strength, or it's cathartic for me to say all of this. And after this is over, I'll finish the glass of whiskey I have here, and I'll be like, okay, now I think I'm finally to that point where I finally put this aside, where I can say, let's move on.
I hope so. I
So
hope so. At the very least, I hope I hope it gives you, a little bit of closure. And while we'll never really forget these situations that happen, you how you deal with them and how you grieve with them, it evolves. Whereas I'm sure a week or two after, it can cause someone to break down, but then months or maybe years later, when the dust kind of settles, because it's not the same for everybody. When you think about it, you're like, okay, then, it makes me kind of sad, but what's happened. I think it helps to reflect back on what you were just talking about. Like, what's happened since then? How has this brought me together with some people that I would not have talked to? So, and like you were saying, wish we could be talking about, our mile paces, or, how your first triathlon or something like that. But, we're talking about this, but the thing is, we're talking, and this is going to put both you and I in touch with other people, and then we're going to talk. And speaking of talking, my wife actually says that I barely ever come up for air, so I can talk a lot. And but that's with this, it's awesome, because it's taking that situation, and it's taking this loss that we've had, and it's making it, turning a negative into a minus into a plus. And some people, I think some people pat themselves on the back when it's like, okay, well, that project at work didn't work out, but maybe I pivoted it into something different, and that's awesome for them. But I think this type of pivoting is a whole nother level of pivoting, and it shows how strong the people who go through this are, even if they weren't strong going into it. Because I'm sure there's people who are, maybe didn't have the strongest personalities in the world, or the strongest, maybe the strongest relationships. But once they've gone through it, and they walk through hell only to come out smiling on the other end, I mean, there's certainly something to be said for that. So, and it's I wish that conversations like this didn't have to happen, but I'm glad that when I'm talking about this right now, and actually I video some of this conversation, I like that I look back and I'm smiling about this stuff. And I hope, especially after your glass of whiskey, what kind of whiskey are you drinking, by the way?
I don't know. It was something I got for Christmas, and I put it in my decanter, and usually I forget what's in there. It's good bourbon though. It's actually, and I need to clarify, it's bourbon, not whiskey. I'm not.
Okay. Okay.
I'm much more of a bourbon drinker than a whiskey guy. Growing up near Louisville, and being from down there, it's kind of like, I often tell folks, like, I got all the benefit of growing up in the South without ever having to say I'm from Kentucky. So that includes bourbon. So I have I have an affinity for it, and it's pretty good stuff. I'm not sure what it is. I'm probably pretty sure it's Woodford, because that's what a lot of folks got me for Christmas. But I do have a bottle of Basil Hayden here sitting in my office that's unopened, and that's kind of my go-to.
Basil Hayden?
Yeah, I really like that.
Nice.
Maybe
the next
probably
time.
some bourbon connoisseur out there who's just like, what a schmuck.
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably Jeremy, actually. I'm sure he's listening.
Jeremy's
like,
a whiskey guy. He can go take a leak.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But yeah, either at the end of this conversation or at the end of that glass of whiskey, I hope you have the same thing too, where you're kind of smiling after this, and hopefully it's not the first time, but if it was, hopefully this is the first time you're saying, like, I talked about it, and I got a smile on my face after that conversation. And I want people who are listening to this too, like, know that there's going to be conversations on here that are going to be dark, and there's going to be conversations on here that are going to be happy, and there's going to be everything in between. But we're always going to keep it kind of lighthearted. And, I mean, this is why, like, I'll vet out people who are on the show. And you and I have talked before this, and, getting people who are, well-spoken, even if they're not, like, if we can just have a conversation and go down this rabbit hole like we did with our friend Jeremy, like I think it's just good to have a smile and laugh about a few things when you're talking about something like this, and I think it opens you up a little bit. So, but when you're not talking about this stuff, Bobby, and you're not, when no one else is around, maybe you're just kind of, you're just hanging out on the weekend or whatever. What are you doing to kind of disconnect yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, we did talk about, I do endurance type of stuff, and that I think that is probably more of anything a release for me for stuff. Like I like to run by myself. I like to ride by myself. Obviously, you can really only swim by yourself, and that's the most miserable thing out there is swimming. So anybody that loves swimming, kudos to you. Send some of that to me. But it was that's the stuff that I do. That what you talking about, like disconnecting, like that. That's the stuff that kind of helps me cope with most anything. And part of it too is we were going through all of that. We were in the middle of renovating our house, and so renovating the living room, and to be honest, that's something I completely left out. Like that was something that I was able to do to kind of just completely get out. And so it was like, we had dust everywhere, and so it was like not real great for Megan to be around her all the time, or even Evie. So we had like the Fist Queen and all that kind of stuff we were doing in our living room, and so as much as I could, keeping all that stuff, but like I could go in that room by myself and just be there alone, and that was it. And it was like drywall. So it was like doing the drywall, and then hanging the ceiling, and doing the can lights and all that kind of stuff. And my dad came up, and we talked a little bit about this, when he was here, and so those are all things that are left out of that story. That are like details, but as I look back and say, like, those are the things that kind of, I think, help me a little bit, kind of deal with some of this stuff. And those are hobbies of mine, is the DIY stuff, and then doing those races and sports and that kind of. I've always been an athlete, if you will. I was never really great at anything, but I did do a lot of different things. I was good or okay at a lot of different things. I was never really great at one thing, and so I think that's okay though. I've got a lot of interests and that kind of stuff. So I guess that's. But those three things really are the ones that kind of help me get away or disconnect, or that sort of thing. I would love for Megan to do those kinds of things with me, but she's more of the meditator individual, and my meditation happens in an arrow position on a bike going
Yeah.
35 miles an hour down a hill.
Yeah. So now when you're doing that stuff, I found a difference in that and other things, but when you're doing the endurance sports, are you thinking about anything or nothing?
Sometimes it's the how much pain are you in, but you'd be surprised, I think, with for me, it's like I've made a lot of important decisions on a run or a bike ride. It's like, or I have had a lot of good ideas on a run or a bike ride. Now, whether or not I remember them when I'm done and have the wherewithal to write them down or whatever, that's a different story. But, I've solved world problems doing those things.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, you could do a lot. On those days and times when you're on the bike, because sometimes going out for you're training for I did that half Ironman in August, so when you're out doing a 60-mile ride one day, that takes about 3.5 hours sometimes, depending on hills and how fast you're going, all that kind of stuff. So you got a lot of time on a bike to think. And of the three, I would say the bike is probably the one that for me it's my favorite. It's the one I'm the best at. So it's also the one for me that maybe requires the least amount of effort, that I can actually do that kind of stuff while riding and think about different things. While I'm running, it's like you're looking at your watch, like how fast am I going? Am I going too slow? Like I've got a pace I'm trying to hit, that kind of stuff. On the bike, I think you get into a rhythm much easier than you do on a ride. All that to say, you have a lot of time to think sometimes when you're out there. So yeah, I think about a lot of different stuff. But it's those are things for me that are fun and that I like to do, and everybody has their own. And some people it's hunting, and some it's like, yeah, I'm going to go do physical labor. Others like, I'm going to read, or I'm going to meditate or do yoga, or whatever it is for somebody. I think you've got to be able to recognize that you sometimes every now and then you got to take some time for yourself, and I think what this can turn into, Kyle, is probably like a men's health podcast too. It's like how can we help men be healthy in a number of different ways, and so that's something. I think it's important for for us as men sometimes to think about like, hey, what do I need to do for me sometimes? And while we kind of talked about it, it's like we always try to put at least for you and I don't know how everyone feels out there, but for me, it's like my wife and my child, they come first, and what I need to do comes second or third sometimes, and sometimes it comes even after what the dogs need. So it's like, okay, I need, so Saturday mornings are for me. Like I go out and I meet my team and I'll go for a run with them or I'll go for a ride, and then I know that when I'm back, it's like, okay, dad time, or time to be a husband, or whatever. It's time for me to do what I need to do around here to make sure that my family is taken care of and that they're comfortable, and all of that kind of stuff. I guess that provider mentality, I think that we all kind of inherently have. But at the same time, it's like we've kind of established that there's a point in time once a week that I can say that I'm going to go do this and I'll be back later. And we both kind of have that time too. So it's important to have a balance.
Good, good. Yeah, my wife and I have a similar agreement. Mine's about 4:30 in the morning every morning, and we're and the dog's in on that agreement as well, because 4:30, actually about 4:15, I am up. I have to wake the dog up to take her out, and then as soon as we come back in, the dog runs up the stairs, wakes up my wife, and brings her down to the couch where they can sleep until 6 o'clock when I get back from the gym. And it's like clockwork every morning. If my dog doesn't get that time too, it's like her day is all jacked up too.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah. I used to do the 4:30 thing. I was really, for probably 2 years, I was really good at it.
Yeah.
And then when Evelyn came along, it was like, okay, 4:30 is a feed time. So you can't leave anymore at 4:30 to go work out. It's like, well, okay, I have to figure out a new time to do this. So it's just adapting and collaborating,
Exactly. And it's nice when Megan's got your back with that. And then you it sounds like, she's got her time too, like you said. So that helps out. And, like in the men's health thing is pretty funny you say that, because that's actually how this is listed in iTunes as the category. Really? Yeah. So
I just followed the link for the first episode. I didn't even notice that. That's great. That's good. I think,
yes.
That's good. I think this is helpful for, I think it should be helpful for people. And I hope, it's successful, and that other men reach out to you to share their story, and you can talk and kind of get this out there a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, Bobby, I'm gonna wrap it up from here, man. Okay. It has been an absolute pleasure talking, man.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to do this, and like I said, I wish our connection could have came under different circumstances, but I'm glad that we've been able to kind of connect virtually and over the phone. Hopefully soon we'll get to connect in person.
Sounds good, man. All right. Well, we're going to close it out here. Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and stay tuned for episode 3.